Good morning, guys, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Blackie. Okay, today we're going to do a deep dive into a diamond shelter, or sometimes called a plow point shelter. Now, this isn't going to be just about how to set one up. We've seen that 1,000 times. I did living history for 20 plus years, and in that time period, quite often I used a 10 by 10 canvas tarp as my tent. And so setting it up in a diamond shelter plow point configuration, I've slept in this thing and utilized it in all kinds of weathers, all 4 seasons. And so let me share with you tips and tricks on how to set up and how to use it, how to adapt it for weather conditions to make yourself dry and more comfortable. Because it's those little details that get to you. It's not the fact that you didn't pitch your tarp. You pitched your tarp, but how did I get wet? It's blowing rain. Why am I getting wet inside? Nothing's coming through the top, but I'm getting wet. This is tips and tricks for that, how to avoid that. It's the subtle nuances that make it comfortable, that make you a woodsman. So let's begin. The first thing is location, of course. And so we're going to practice the 5 W's. Now, if you're not familiar with what the 5 W's is, here is a link to my previous thing where we deal with it. So first thing is, once we've established the 5 W's, is we're going to be looking at location to actually set it up. Now, if I'm in a woodland environment, I don't want to be hooked to a huge tree if I have a choice, because great big trees, as their root ball grows, the ground kind of aims up like this, and that means that any water wants to funnel down into the tent, into the diamond point. So I want a smaller tree. So I've got a good canopy right here, and that's going to break up any heavy rain, so it's hitting the leaves and diffusing it out rather than just pouring straight down on you. And that's going to give me some shelter to begin with before we ever get to the actual tent. Next, I have picked out a tree that's a smaller diameter, that's got plenty of room around it. And let me show you how to set up the rope on it, because that makes a difference. Okay, tip number 1, attaching your rope to the tree. I'm going to take my quick deploy Ridgeline, I'm using toggles. I'm going to come around and I'm going to hook it onto the tree. Now, usually you would think I'd want it straight across, but there's an advantage. If I put it up there and then I angle the back of the rope lower than the front of the rope, this is where my rope's coming off, right? Here's where I'm coming. I want it downhill from there. That's because in heavy torrential downpour, as the rain is hitting the tree and is running down the tree, when it hits this cord, it wants to roll up onto it, not necessarily drip, and want to run with it. By turning it at an angle like that, as the water hits, I want it to run and drip away. If I, absolutely worse, angle it this way, I'm funneling water to run down my ridge line into the tent. So I want to angle it down on the far side so that the rain hits, and should rain come on this side, I want it to run around the cord and then drip on the low point on the far side rather than dripping into my tent. Okay? Now, it depends on how you're actually attaching the rope, but usually a knot or something right here should keep water from flowing down into the tent much, but it can happen depending on the rope being used, especially if you're using something like a slightly larger rope, like a climbing type rope, or a sisal rope or something like 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, something like that. It will have a much stronger wicking ability to make it run down. So I make the back side back there to take the water and drop it off. That's first tip. Tip number 2, height. Oftentimes I see people want to set up the diamond shelter with a point way up high, like they can walk into it. In certain conditions, that is a good idea. By putting it very steeply, I'm going to make water sheet off of it in a hurry. So if I'm expecting torrential downpours, I want it at a steep angle like that to get the maximum amount of water off that. But if I'm not in that kind of rain, and I'm going to be in cold conditions, I want to actually lower it a little bit lower, because remember, I'm going to have a fire out here in front of it to capture heat. So I want my peak lower. How low? Well, typically on me, I'm 5'10", and I want the peak of it to be about here, about top of my middle of my sternum in front of it, because I want to be able to pull the tarp further back out and have a deeper shelter rather than a tall shelter. See what I'm saying? Going deeper will give me more room inside and also help capture and hold heat. So as my fire heat radiates in, it's not such a steep up angle, because heat's going to flow up, remember. It's not going to flow up and out as easy. I want it a little slower angle so it doesn't flow up and out, and I will be warmer inside the shelter with the fire out in front of it. So that's tip number 2. Okay, tip number 3. Attaching the actual tarp to your ridgeline. Do we do ridgeline over or ridgeline under? If we do ridgeline under, it can be set up very, very quickly. And in emergency situations where I got rain coming right now and I've got to get it up now, I will often just do that. Pull this line straight out, stake it down, and then just throw the tarp up over it, anchor it in position, and go. But ridgeline outside of it actually works better. It gives you more room inside and a roomier shelter, and I'll show you that. So that is tip number 4. Here is tip number 5. On one corner, go ahead and attach a loop. The toggle. So I take my toggle, I go over, just like that, give it a twist, and come back over a second time. Now that's good and secure to that button, and that ain't gonna go nowhere. By doing that, like we talked about, the rain coming down is gonna want to go downhill to that far side. You always got to adjust it whenever you get it up there, just like that. And any rain that does get onto this and start to come out is going to drip because of it, because it's not a direct line. Now we pull it out and set it up. Okay, tip number 5. In the middle of your tarp, put some sort of tie out. And many tarps come with a tie out already hooked there. If not, I do what's called a penny mod. That is simply a penny. You use a small stone, whatever, but it's a penny that I pushed up in there and I've gathered up underneath with a small loop of light bank line, just like that. This will pull the center out and give me a lot more headroom in there. So now, to set it up, I've attached it to the top. I'm going to pull it out at the bottom, the far corner, and stake it down. And then we'll start talking about this. Let me set that up. Okay, now what I've done is I've run my ridge line down, and I've taken my first prusik with a toggle, and I've ran through that loop that I put in the center. I've taken and staked out the end of my diamond, and now I'm going to be able to pull up with it right here in order to pull the top tight. Now with this, I can go up. I got a convenient tree over here I can hook to, or I may use some other lifting device, and I'll show you that in a second. But I want to pull it up in the middle to give myself the maximum headroom inside. But first, I'm going to stake out my 2 corners. So tip number 6 is anchor the top, hook to the middle, anchor your bottom. Now stake out your wings before you make the final pull. A lot of times they'll come up like this and I want to pull it up way tight, but that shortens up the side doors. I want my sides to sit down flush to the ground if possible. And I'm going to augment that in just a minute. But I want it to come to the ground to keep air, wind, cold wind, whatever from coming underneath the edge. So I want this to seal, this envelope to seal down to the ground. So make sure your side wings fit to the ground. Okay, now I have my ply point set up. Should I not want to use the ridge line inside, I can use something like a walking stick or something like that to hold up the middle. And this can have some advantages. So tip number 6, you can use a walking stick, hiking pole, or whatever to stick up in the middle of it. But make sure that the top is rounded off. You don't want to poke a hole into your tarp. But being able to push this up, make it snug like an umbrella holding it up. This also gives me something I can wrap around like a piece of cord or something and hang light gear or something off of this in the middle of my camp, in the middle of my pack. But understand that if wind gets up and gets going, this may fall down and bonk you in the head. So you want this to be really snug in place, right? And again, nothing that's going to poke a hole in the top. A walking stick can also be used if you don't have a convenient tree in the back. You can take whatever kind of pole or whatever you've got back here, set this down, anchor this line to it, and then stake it to another stake to hold this up as well. Without the hiking stick inside, you've got more room inside, but at the same time, it is also very convenient to stick the stick up in place rather than having to rig up if I don't have a handy tree. Now, next tip. Okay, tip number 7. Once you've laid it out and got it set up like this, you may have a little gap right here in the middle or something. That's the reason we want to pack pine straw or whatever both on the inside and the outside to seal up this edge. In the winter, it's to keep cold wind from blowing underneath and robbing the heat of the shelter. And also it's to keep rain from blowing under. So I want to rake up a pretty good sized pile. Come 2 or 3 inches up the side of the actual tarp itself, full length of some sort of leaf debris or whatever if it's available. I can use dirt. And if I don't have anything, I'm on a sandbar or something, I may cut a trench and actually stake my corners down in that trench, making this edge go below ground level, and then pack sand all the way around it. That will work as well. So tip number 7 is seal your edges all the way around to keep A, cold wind from coming under, B, rain or whatever from blowing underneath, 3, to keep heat in the shelter better. So seal the edges. Okay, tip number 8. Now that I've got my edges sealed all the way around, I got plenty of room to sit in my shelter. Which way do I put my fire? That is, which way is the predominant wind coming? I want to pitch this so that the wind is going diagonally by, so that when I put my fire here, I want the smoke to go that way, away from me. So the wind is coming from behind me, but not straight in front of me. I don't want, like where the camera is, I don't want the wind coming over and going there. That will cause a back eddy, and that will suck smoke into the shelter. I don't want that. So I want a wind going across this way, not this way. I want the wind coming across at an angle, you see what I'm saying, but not directly from the shelter towards the fire, because that would cause that smoke to make that eddy, and that's going to smoke you out. So tip 8, rig it up so you don't end up being smoked out. Tip number 9. Now that I just said that about smoke, what if there'd been a lot of ticks in the area and everything, and I've sealed up the edge and I'm a little bit concerned? I may want to use smoke. So right here, you know, about where a little closer, I want to build a real smoky fire. Not a lot of flame, but you know what I mean, a lot of smoke, and fan it into my actual tent to smoke out the shelter. This will cause all the spiders and bugs and stuff like that to run, because it will smell like a fire. And they panic and run, and the leaves and etc. getting away from it. They know they die if they stay there. So I have smoked out a shelter before, get the fire going over there, and then put green leafy stuff on it and generate the smoke and fan it into the fire. If you've got nothing else, take your shirt off, button it closed, if it's a button or if it's a t-shirt, run your arms into it so it's right here, and use that as a fan to fan the smoke into your shelter. That will help smoke it out and get rid of any stuff like that. Okay, tip number 9. I've got my fire there, I've got my camp set up, I've got my gear right here in front of me and in the far side. Which way do I want to put my feet? Okay, I want to put my feet down toward the point behind me and have my head up here. Firewood, wherever my head is going to be, let's say right here, because the fire is going to be right there. Right here is where I'm going to put my firewood, right here underneath the edge of my tarp. I'm going to gather and stack that up. One is a windbreak above my head to keep any kind of wind from coming around. And 2, during the night, whenever I wake up and I need to add a little wood to my fire, I don't have to get up and walk over there to go get the firewood. I want the firewood within arm's reach. I want to just reach over my head, grab a couple of sticks, roll up on one elbow, and toss wood into the fire and lay back down without having to get up. And so therefore I can recharge my fire without having to get out of bed. So let's say that again. My bed's this way. Right here is where I'm going to put my firewood pile. Right here is my fire, just about one good step away from the edge of my tarp. Not so close I'm going to set my tarp on fire, but not too far away. My fire's going to be a bed of coals and probably a Siberian log fire at night. When I wake up during the night, if it has died down a little bit, I'm going to reach up, grab, add some wood to the fire, maybe reach up and have the poles pull a little bit closer, lay back down, go back to bed, and not have to get up and out. That's one of the secrets to it. And finally, the last one to bring up. By making this a little bit lower, like I talked about in step 1, I'm trapping more heat. I've got more of a peak back up here behind me where I'm pulling that up. So the heat that comes into the shelter is going to stay in the shelter. It's not going to flow out nearly as fast if this was a really steep pitch. So again, you want the wide open pitch. How can I regulate that heat a little bit? I don't want to be burned out in here. It gets so hot I can't stand it, you know what I mean? Keeping your fire relatively small and mostly a bed of coals. What I recommend is to start out with a small campfire for your heating and cooking when you're sitting up like me or lounging right here by the fire. Sit up against the tree, and then when the night progresses and it's getting closer, put a big back log and lay the other logs coming up on it to begin a Siberian log fire. So when I transition to time to go to bed, it's no longer a round campfire, it is now a Siberian log fire, and that will give me a much longer burn time. So I don't have to get up nearly as much during the night to stoke the fire. Maybe 2 or 3 times as opposed to 8 or 9 times. See what I'm saying? So the type of fire does make a difference. Hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. If you have, please hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And until next time, I'm Blackie wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.